Lucky to have an important person from New York City coming all the way out to New Jersey to do our program today. Stephen Ashkinazy is one of the founders of the Hendrick Martin Institute, which in 1982 became the first social service agency specifically providing for the needs of lesbian and gay youth. It was there that in 1985 he created the Harvey Milk School, a high school program for lesbian and gay students unable to attend other schools due to homophobia. He served as director of the school until September 1992. He is also an early pioneer and activist in the gay community since 1970 and one of the earliest advocates for the rights of lesbian and gay youth. In 1973, he was one of the founders of the National Gay Task Force. In 1975, one of the founders of the Association of Lesbian and Gay Social Workers. In the late 70s, he headed the Manhattan Borough President's Task Force on Youth Issues. From 1978 to 1982, he was an openly gay member of the Community Planning Board of the Greenwich Village. He served on the very first board of directors of the Lesbian and Gay Community Center, assisting in the purchase of its building from the city. In 1973, he was also the first openly gay MSW student in the country and the first to be assigned to a field placement in the gay community. It's really impressive. In recognition of his outstanding community service, Steve has received awards from Gay and Lesbian Youth of New York and from the Village Reform Democratic Club. Recently, Ashkinazy founded Madrigal House, New York's first residence for homeless gay youth. He is currently serving as executive director, and as I understand, this is really a project that's very close to your heart, and you're working on it very hard, and I think we will all benefit from learning more about it. And he's going to speak today on the topic of working with families with gay children, getting through the guilt, fear, anger, loss, and denial, and getting back to love.
Good morning. My name is Steve Ashkinazy. All the things that were just said about me. That's who I am. And let me just give a brief outline of what I intend to cover today so you'll have an idea of what we're going to do. We have until 12 o'clock. I intend to talk a lot about myself, about my work, in particular some of the organizations that were spoken about, the Hendrick Martin Institute and the Harvey Milk School, and most recently Madrigal House. I intend to talk quite a bit about gay youth, and hopefully everybody will come away from here with an understanding today of what a lesbian or gay adolescent goes through in the coming out process and the issues that they face. And we're also going to talk about family issues, how the coming out of a lesbian or gay youth impacts on the family, and what people can do as professionals to help and assist in that process. And I'm going to try to leave about at least half an hour for questions and answers and discussion or rebuttal, whatever anybody wants to talk about. So, I am an openly gay man. I came out 30 years ago when I was 14 years old, when the gay community and the reaction to gay people was very different than it is today. In the very early days of the gay movement, by 1970, I became very involved in the gay movement, and that changed my life tremendously, and gave me a lot of exciting opportunities to which lead me to being here today. In 1973, I decided that I wanted to be a social worker, because that was the kind of work that I was already doing, except I was giving it away. I was doing a lot of community work, and I decided to get my MSW. So in 1973, I applied to a lot of, I'm a New Yorker, so I applied to all the schools in Manhattan. And the reaction that I got from Columbia, from Hunter, from NYU, was that I could be accepted into the MSW programs of those schools if I would be positive about my homosexuality. And And my desire to do my field placement within the lesbian and gay community was completely rejected, and in fact, the faculty advisor at Columbia rejected the notion that there was such a thing as a gay community, and told me that homosexual people did not constitute the definition of the community. So I ended up going to Stony Brook, which I was reminded of very much this morning because I'm not much of a commuter. But for 2 years, when I was working on my MSW, I was doing a lot of driving between Manhattan and Stony Brook, out on Long Island, in the other direction. So this morning coming out here was very much reminded. It's not my favorite thing to do. For most of the past 20 years, my work in the lesbian community has primarily been with adolescents. And that's what I want to talk about today. Most recently, though, for the past 10 years, I've also been doing a lot of work, which I'm not going to talk about today, but if somebody may be interested. I'm working with adults in the Orthodox Jewish community, which is a totally different issue. But it's fascinating, and I'm glad to be there because there's not a lot going on and not a lot of resources in that community. But as an Orthodox Jewish person also, I'm glad that I can be a resource. In fact, I run a support group once a week for Orthodox gay men. Before I go much further, I do want to find out who you are and why people are here, so that I can be sure to direct my talk more to what your needs are, so I don't waste my time and your time. I would like to see how many people here, by show of hands, are working currently as therapists. Quite a lot, that's good, that's great. How many people here are students working toward working in the therapy profession? Almost the same amount. And how many people here are here for other reasons? A few. Okay. No, okay. I hope that I can satisfy all of you today. I want to talk a bit about the Hedrick Martin Institute, because that really very much structured the last 15 years of my life, and really taught me more than any schooling that I went through, any training that I went through. I would like to ask one more question. How many people in this room have been to a previous training on lesbian and gay issues? Some. Back in 1979, several professionals, including myself, who knew each other through the lesbian and gay political community, and who were working in health services and in adolescent services, in education, were sharing anecdotally stories that we had about the ways in which we felt that adolescents were not treated well, gay adolescents were not treated well in schools, in health services. And we put together what in the beginning was just a watchdog group, an organization to look into the problem, to study, to monitor, maybe to advocate, but not really to provide direct services. But by 1983, the need to provide direct services just became so apparent to us. As we did interviews with social workers and guidance counselors, we kept getting horror story after horror story about ways in which lesbian and gay teenagers were not only discriminated against, but physically and emotionally abused, pushed out of the system, forced into the streets, into homelessness, into every other kind of problem which we're going to talk quite a bit about. And so in 1983, we opened the doors of the Hedrick Martin Institute as an agency providing direct services with a very small grant from Department of Special Services for Children, which was the New York State umbrella group for foster care. And within the first year, we saw 1,000 teenagers. And within 2 years, we had to move to a larger headquarters. In the 10 years that the Institute has been in existence, it just this past month made its 5th move to larger space, has a budget of close to $3 million a year, a staff of between 45 and 50 people who are all overworked with giant caseloads. And it's hard to believe that just 10 years ago, when we proposed doing this, people didn't think that there was a need. We had to demonstrate that there was. And even in the lesbian and gay community, there was a lack of support, which I'll talk about later too. So, in 1983, I started out as the clinical director for the Institute for the Protection of Lesbian and Gay Youth, which later became the Hedrick Martin Institute, to honor Drs. Emery Hedrick and Dr. Damian Martin, who were the founders of the Institute. And we started off providing very simple counseling services. Within the first few months, though, it became apparent to me and to others that this was not really addressing the main issues. That we were seeing a lot of young people coming in for counseling, but their issues weren't about counseling. Their issues were about isolation, about loneliness, about wanting to be in a gay environment, wanting to be with other gay people. And so within a very short time, we started running groups, rap groups for young people, which was very successful. And eventually we had to expand to social and recreational programs, which I really think is the most successful program at the Institute to date. The hardest one to fund. Nobody thinks that recreation is very important, but in working with lesbian and gay adolescents, developing space where people can have appropriate adolescent social interaction is so important. And so, while it's the largest, and best attended programs at the Institute, it's the one that's the least funded and most difficult to get support for. Nobody thinks that it's important. In 1985, I started the Harvey Milk School, which a few months after we started became quite a scandal. I don't know if anybody remembers when, for a few weeks, it was sort of the Tanya Harding issue of the day. It was the issue that all the newspapers thought everybody wanted to hear about constantly. And fortunately, at least within the first week, most of the reasonable newspapers realized that this wasn't a scandal. It was an important social issue. But all of our lives have permanently changed when we went to bed one morning as normal individuals and found ourselves the next morning on the front page of the New York Times. And for a week, my phone was ringing in the middle of the night from live, radio talk shows who wanted to find out more about the school and talk to me and just satisfy the curiosity of the listenership. And ducking reporters and photographers for a few weeks. It was a media circus that I will never ever forget. But life has returned to normal. What eventually happened, of course, with the Harvard Middle School as a media was people realized that we weren't teaching young people to be gay. We weren't, which was what people believed in the beginning, that we weren't, as the far right sometimes likes to believe about the lesbian community, we're not recruiting adolescents. We were picking up the pieces that homophobia and prejudice were creating. We were helping young people who had been disenfranchised, who had been thrown out by their families, who were unable to attend school, complete their education. What happened at the Institute is I started to realize that a lot of the young people we were working with were dropouts. A lot of them were chronic truants, too young to legally drop out, but were not attending school, who wanted to come to our facility in the morning instead of after school. And so, our original goal was not to create a separate school, but to meet with the Board of Ed, address this issue, insist that they assume responsibility for those young people who were victims of homophobia when other schools were not willing to address it. Over the past 20 years, the public school system has done a very good job of taking responsibility for addressing issues of racism, cultural difference, sexism, but it has not been willing to address homophobia. And so when high school students are taunted for being different, for being thought to be lesbian or gay, they don't get the support that they need from the faculty, from the staff, from the guidance counselors. In fact, I've heard many, many stories of young people who would go to complain about having been called a faggot and be told by a teacher, but isn't that what you are? And so, many of these young people were really not emotionally and not physically safe. In fact, in studies that we've done, at the Institute, a very large percent of the young people that come to us have been the victims of physical abuse at the hands of their peers. At the Harvey Milk School, it's almost 100%. More than 90% of the young people that enter the Harvey Milk School have histories of being of physical violence directed against them because of their sexual orientation. And I'm going to talk more about suicide later, but just while I'm talking about the Harvey Milk School, nearly 50% of the students entering the Harvey Milk School have attempted suicide. So for anybody who thinks that there's something, sort of sensational about, creating a school that's special and different, for gay people, and thinks that it's a privilege to go there, I hope that I can correct that misunderstanding. The Harvey Milk School is a last chance. It's a last alternative. In fact, in the screening for the Harvey Milk School, one of the things that we really try to do is find other alternatives. Sometimes if a young person has been a victim of violence or persecution in their current school program, maybe it's possible to just transfer them to another school. The Harvey Milk School has a lot of good things going for it, but it's a very small program. It lacks the resources of a lot of other schools. Has a very small staff, a very small student body, and I really believe that most students would benefit more greatly by being in a more mainstream school. But for those students who really can't attend another school, I'm really glad that the Harvey Milk School exists there for them.
How many students
About 50. There's about 50 students at the Harvey Milk School. That's been a constant number. Pretty much because that's what our resources, allow us to accommodate. There are benefits to the school too. It's a very individualized education. Interesting, while I'm on that topic of individualized education, the majority of the young people who come to us have been labeled as special ed. We have discovered in testing that many of those young people who have been labeled special ed are not special ed. Don't have learning disabilities, but were presenting learning problems in the other environments because the fear and anxiety that going to school every day created for them made it difficult or impossible to learn. We actually, it's 9th through 12th grade. We actually did a study that because in our first year in operation of the Harvey Milk School, someone from the Board of Ed approached us and was curious about the fact that we had so many young people in our program, who were designated special ed, And this supervisor of the Board of Ed developed a theory of her own that maybe there was a correlation between homosexuality and learning disability. And I knew that couldn't be right, so I didn't want it to be right, so I knew it couldn't be right. So we looked into it, and in interviewing young people and discovering them and retesting people, we discovered that most of the young people, never should have been designated as special ed, but that people should have looked into the environmental issues that were disturbing them and were preventing them from learning. I also want to talk about Madrigal House, my new program, but I'm going to save that for a little bit later because I want to get into some of the other issues I want to talk today. But I will just tell you that I started Madrigal House back this past September after trying to get it off the ground for about a year and getting funding and stuff. And it's the very first residence in New York City or in this whole region, specifically for lesbian and gay youth. And I'm very proud that there's finally a place because in all the years that I was at the Hendrick Martin Institute, the one unsolvable problem was the lack of appropriate shelter and residence to refer young people to. And it was something that we dealt with almost every single day. Homelessness is a tremendous problem in the lesbian and gay adolescent community. And the fact that it hasn't been addressed is very disturbing because in many studies that were done by other organizations, even by ones in the Catholic Church like Covenant House, they discovered that possibly somewhere between 30 and 40% of homeless teenagers in New York are lesbian and gay. I mean, that's an unacceptable statistic. But in spite of that, all of the programs that exist for homeless kids continue to be very homophobic and unwelcoming to lesbian and gay kids. And Covenant House, everybody's familiar with Covenant House? Covenant House, which is the largest, it's a monolithic organization, and in fact, unfortunately, in the past dozen years has swallowed up the funding for a lot of very good smaller organizations. So that now in New York City, when you talk about finding shelter for homeless youth, you almost necessarily are talking about Covenant House. Because as they've grown, they've just dried up the available funds for other places. But Covenant House continues to be run with a very particular religious and moral orientation, which makes it very difficult for gay people to survive there. Because of intervention by the Hendrick Martin Institute, Covenant House has been forced in the past 7 or 8 years to give lip service to lesbian and gay issues. And there are, in superficial ways, there are attempts to address those issues. But the truth, when you get down to it, is that when a problem arises, gay kids are scapegoated. The homophobia of the staff is not checked. The homophobia of other clients there is not watched, and gay people are not protected there. So in many, many ways, they're still forced out into the streets and back into homes. So I want to talk about working with gay youth. Anybody who's going to be working with lesbian and gay youth has to start off by understanding what some of the myths and stereotypes are and realizing that they're not true. One of the myths about homosexuality is that homosexuality is a choice. And even some of the best intentioned people in the profession will say things in all their liberalism and good intentions, such as, I believe that everybody should have the right to choose who they are. That's a personal choice, and I would not hold that against someone. But it's not a very helpful opinion, because It's inaccurate, for one. Homosexuality is not a choice. The only choice in homosexuality is that lesbian and gay people come to a point in their life when they have to make a decision whether they're going to accept this part of themselves and get on with their life and heal the wounds that have occurred by trying to fight it, and by rejecting a big part of themselves, or whether they're going to spend their entire lives struggling with what is inevitably just part of their identity. There is no choice in homosexuality. If there was, you wouldn't see the suicide statistic going up. I don't know how you can reconcile the idea that homosexuality is a choice with the high statistic of suicide in the lesbian gay community. Retrospective surveys that were done with the adult lesbian gay community have shown that close to 24% of lesbian and gay adults report that they had serious suicide ideation in their teenage years. Many attempted suicide. At the Hedrick Martin Institute, as I said before, a very large percentage of young people that we see, since most of them turn out, come to us with histories of suicide attempts. And one of the interesting parts of that statistic is that most of the young people that we talk to, even many who have been hospitalized as a result of a suicide attempt, tell us that they never reported the reason why they tried to kill themselves. Some of them, been in hospital, doing therapy, but they're afraid that if they tell the doctor will tell their parents. They're afraid of the rejection, afraid of what it will mean. They're afraid that it will be held against them. So most of the young people that we see, even who have histories of attempted suicide, have never told anybody why they tried to do it. And even in spite of that statistic, with many of the experts in the field of adolescent suicide in the country indicate homosexuality as one of the prime reasons why teenagers try to kill themselves. And that's a new statistic. Up until not too many years ago, many of the experts in the field would not look at that. In fact, at the very first conference, which is about 7 years ago, the very first national conference on adolescent suicide, which was held in Washington, D.C., the keynote speaker, whose name I don't remember, a psychiatrist, a very famous adolescent psychiatrist. And he never mentioned homosexuality as a cause for suicide. But after his keynote speech, I went up to him and I addressed him about the subject. And he was big enough to re-examine his own thinking. And he said that of the four out of the 5 case histories that he used in his speech were lesbian and gay kids. And he had never made the correlation. Another very important myth that has to be given up if you're going to work with lesbian and gay people is that homosexuality can be changed. It's unfortunate that more than 20 years after the American Psychiatric Association has concluded that homosexuality is not an illness, that there's still lots and lots of therapists and working in the therapy profession that are still claiming and holding out promises to gay people that they can change them. And then again, report all kinds of statistics about success. I don't want to dwell on the subject a whole lot, but I've seen countless studies which show that all of those successes are very, very short-lived. That, when you're working with people who hate being gay, who hate who they are, and you hold out a promise that you can change them, yes, you can brainwash people into thinking that they're not what they are, and that they might go for a year or 2 or 5 or 10 years rejecting their sexual orientation. Many of them will get married and have families, only to come to the conclusion later on that there was a lie, that when they're on the point of a nervous breakdown because of the frustration, because of the self-deception, and realizing that they have to be who they are, and not only are they hurt, but countless other lives have been drawn into it, families, your wives, spouses, husbands, children. This is a very big issue in working with the Orthodox Jewish community. Most of the gay men in the Orthodox community are married. And most of those had already confronted their homosexuality before they got married, but were convinced, either through therapy or by religious leaders, that it was something that they could turn away from and leave behind. And so countless people, have been hurt by it. Another myth about working with gay people is that they're easy to spot. And all of the stereotypes, we know what they are. Most people, if you ask on the street, and lots of professionals, and a lot of gay people too, will tell they can always tell the homosexual. They always know who they are. It's such a stereotype in our society that, as I said, it's even infiltrated into the lesbian community. Lots of people go around thinking that they can always spot them. I always tell people, how, please teach me, because I've been trying for 30 years to figure out how to do it. I think I've gotten pretty good, but maybe as good as the weatherman on the networking is ridiculous. I think my biggest advantage in being able to meet and spot up again people is being as open as possible, and then people find me and come to me. So that's been great. And, whether in the professional community or in the Jewish community, there might be a lot of liabilities to walking around as an open gay person, a real target, but for good as well as bad. Whenever I speak at a group like this, and I don't speak a lot, I'm a therapist, and I'm trained to listen much more than talk. So it's nice to have the opportunity to do something different. But it's rare that I come to a group like this that people don't come up to me afterward and want to say, "Get here," and I am glad I'm here to teach everybody and to make those people who are gay feel that they're not isolated, that they're not the ones out there, that there are people here for them. There are a lot of paradoxes about this idea about that gay people are easy to spot, and the stereotypes that people have about gay people. It's always curious to me that some things are sort of inconsistent. For instance, some of these paradoxes abound in a lot of the literature, professional literature about gay people. A lot of the early literature about gay people teamed homosexuality with narcissism, self-love, and believed that gay people were unable to form a bond with another person because they were so full of self-love that they could only attach themselves to someone who was just like themselves. And yet that doesn't sit very well with the other stereotype that people have about gay people, which is that gay people are into, role-playing, and are you the butch or are you the femme? How can you reconcile the idea that the gay people only play one role with the idea that gay people are looking to fall in love with themselves? Even in political circles, homosexuals have always been a political football, as a way of putting down the hated group. In the United States, in the late 40s and early 50s, in the time of McCarthyism, when people were looking for communists, next door and everywhere. Homosexuality, are people aware that homosexuals was also one of the issues that McCarthy was looking at and exposing gay people in the government and other places? And the very notion, in a country like ours, that even the expression of it, people will say pinko commie fad. People say there's the notion that homosexuality was a breakdown of our moral purposes as a country, and that it was related to infiltration by foreign groups and agents that were bringing the threat of homosexuality to this country. And at the same time, in communist countries, and this is very true in Cuba today, as well as in China, and up until a couple of years ago, it was very, very true in Russia, where, as in Cuba, if you're known to be gay, you don't have to get caught in a public act or anything. If you're known to be gay, you can be locked up. And homosexuality is seen as a sign of bourgeois decadence, infiltration of capitalist mentality. So gay people have always been scapegoated, and the stereotypes, don't even make sense when you pit them against each other. It's all full of paradoxes. Another myth about gay people is that they constitute a threat to family values and to the family. That one really gets me angry. And you hear it all the time, especially in political circles. Today, that's one of the main catchphrases of the far right. Gay people are a threat to the family. Gay people are part of every family. I mean, every gay person is someone's son or daughter, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, nephew, cousin, grandchild, grandparent. And all the gay people that I've ever met really want to be part of their families. And the notion that gay people are a threat to family is the single largest obstacle to their being included in family events. The single biggest obstacle to being considered part of their family. Pushing them away, disenfranchising them. If there's any threat to family values, it's the homophobia that's being spread by the far right, which forces families to be afraid of their gay members, which forces families to disown, walk away from, turn their backs on their lesbian and gay brothers and sisters and children. So that gets me mad. Another myth about homosexuality, and this is especially important for people who are working with families, especially for people who are working with adolescents, is an age factor. That there are people who will accept homosexuality, but won't accept that a 14 or 15 or 16-year-old could possibly know if they're gay. And that's something, since I've worked primarily with adolescents, that's something that I constantly come against, working with school counselors and family therapists, is that let him come back when he's 18, let him come back when he's 20 years old, and if he still feels that he's gay or she still wants to be gay, okay, I'll accept it then. But, he or she is too young to make that decision at this point. Now, I'm going to talk soon about coming out and what that process is like, but I have to say that I don't know, and I don't know anybody who knows what it is that makes people come out at different ages. I came out when I was very young. I've known very intelligent people who were in their mid and late 20s and 30s, people who were married with children. I knew one very famous, internationally known author who was 50 before, as he put it, I came to the realization that I was gay. I can't conceive of that, because it's something I knew as long as I have a memory. But people come out at different ages. And even though I would agree with probably most people in this room that that becoming sexually active at a very young age can be very damaging and harmful and dangerous to that person. An awareness of one's sexual orientation is just a very basic piece of self-knowledge for some people that is part of their earliest awareness. An awareness of being different, separate. Even before the sexual awakening of puberty begins, that defines that sense of differentness. Many, many lesbian gay adults will tell you that if you ask them when they knew, they can go way, way back to even before puberty to just an awareness that there was something different, the way that they formed their attachments with their friends, the role models that they picked, the crushes that they had, all told them at a very early age that they were gay, before they had the means to understand what that meant. And for many of them, the awakening of sexual feelings was also the awakening of awareness of their sexual orientation as lesbian and gay. I think it's very damaging to tell a person who's going through that at the time when their hormones are just, racing around and making them crazy, to tell someone that they have to just put it on the back burner and turn away from it, ignore it, that they don't know what's going on in their head. The biggest danger is that it's going to push people into sexual experimentation. Because I don't think, I want to talk about this too, I don't think that an awareness of one's sexual orientation for an adolescent necessarily is going to lead them into sexual experimentation. In fact, I think one of the greatest pleasures and biggest surprises that I had in the years that I worked at the Hedrick Martin Institute was working with adolescents who came to the Institute to explore their feelings about being gay. And a lot of people have the misunderstanding that the Hedrick Martin Institute is a place where kids who are already gay or been out there, maybe some people think it only works with street kids, which it does, but it does some very, very good things to help, reach out to kids who are already on the street. But there are many young people who very intelligently, because they're having questions about their sexual orientation, will call a hotline or even look in the telephone book or call the operator and find the telephone number for the Institute and call up and say, I'm having these feelings, I think I might be gay. How do I find out if I'm gay? And many of those young people, when they come to the Institute to explore this question, have never met another gay person. I had the pleasure to sit face to face with many young people who would tell me that I've had these feelings for a couple of years, but you're the first person that I've ever told them to. It feels so good to talk about it. When I would tell them that I was gay too, they would say, now I really believe that I'm not alone. And it was the first known contact that they had with another gay person, how important it was for them. And what I experienced among those adolescents, the ones who came out in that way, when they became involved in our recreational program, they had, I hate the term normal, but when I made the turn on normal road, but I'm going to use the term for what I consider to be, normal adolescent dating patterns. And I'll go so far as to say that most homosexuals never get to experience normal adolescent dating patterns. Where most gay people are thrust into the world of bars and picking people up and sexual anonymity. And I don't mean to say that that's what the whole gay world is like, but that's what the coming out process is like for most people. That most gay people, when you want to meet other gay people, where do you go? You go to a youth program. But those young people who came to a youth program would experience very normal adolescent dating patterns. They get a crush, they go steady, they exchange rings, they break up, someone new would come in, and then your work as a therapist was really cut out for you because you had someone who's never going to ever come back here again because they were too angry, they were too humiliated. But the important thing is that in all of this process, there might have been some kissing, some hickeys exchanged, but no real sexual activity because there was no need to. It was just the need to make contact, to explore their identities, to explore their attractions to other people and their ability to attract other people. And that's one of the reasons why the opportunity for social interaction is so important for lesbian and gay adolescents, and most of them never ever get it. So when I say that whatever age a young person identifies themselves as being lesbian or gay or thinking about being gay, it's important to respect that. One of the fears that many professionals would have, sometimes I get a call from a guidance counselor in a school and say, no, I don't know what to do. I have a young person here and he thinks he might be gay, but he's not sure. So I'm not comfortable referring him to the Hedrick Martin Institute because I don't want to push him over the edge. You can't push people over the edge. People are gay or they're not gay. If someone is not gay, but confused about it, what better way to help them come to an understanding than to meet people who are gay? But you can't come to an understanding about yourself and different feelings you're having in a vacuum. You need to talk to people who are having the same feelings. Nobody was ever, forced to be gay or pushed over the edge or made to be gay by meeting other gay people. People have only had the opportunity to resolve their feelings, understand them, feel better about them, and be who they are. And many young people who eventually will come out, will find the experience either traumatizing or just decide they're not ready. There are many people who will have the first interaction at a place like the Hedrick Martin Institute and then say, I don't think I'm gay. I don't think this is for me. And we always leave the door open and say, that's fine, that's fine. If you ever need us or want to talk, you know where we are. And sometimes a year later, or more, you get another call or a walk-in and say, I'm thinking about this. I want to give it another try. It's very important to respect that feeling, that when even in young adolescence, and not tell someone that they don't know what's going on in their own life. So, I want to talk about how does a person know if they're gay? What is the experience like to come out? Dr. Damian Martin wrote a wonderful paper in a psychiatric journal a number of years ago, which is, I think, still very relevant, called Learning to Hide, Socialization of a Gay Adolescent, which he talks about as the awareness of one's homosexuality grows. For most adolescents, the feelings that you have to hide your true nature and your feelings grows in proportion with it. The notion of the closet, which comes out of the lesbian and gay community, is a very important one because everybody experiences it. I don't know anybody, I've never met any gay people who did not go through a period of wanting to reject their homosexuality. When first confronted with their sexual feelings, the decision that they made was this would be something that they would overcome. This was something that they were going to deny. And so everybody goes through at least some period, for some people it's their whole life, of denying their true natures to other people. And what it creates is a great deal of isolation. In fact, at the Hedrick Martin Institute, when we talked about problems experienced by lesbian and gay adolescents, the problem at the top of our list was always isolation, because it was uniform. Everybody experienced it. And in fact, we broke it down into 3 kinds of isolation to understand it better. We talked about social isolation, emotional isolation, and cognitive isolation. And I'll explain them. Social isolation, which is very common among lesbian and gay kids, comes about when people realize that they're different, and their fear of being perceived to be different, their fear of being persecuted, their fear of not fitting in, of being rejected, forces a lot of young people to become inclusive. I went through that period. I know what it's like. Can't wait to get home from school, sit in my room, watch TV, bury my nose in a book. No friends. And we all know that the most important developmental task of an adolescent is to develop a social identity. That's the time in your life when you do it. You don't get another chance unless it's through therapy. In developmental psychology, there are different stages when you can really learn something. And an adolescent is learning who they are in the world. They're leaving their family and starting to see themselves as they're perceived by other people, how they fit into the world. And what most lesbian and gay adolescents learn is that they're different, that they're outcasts, that they don't fit into the world. And so many become very reclusive, don't develop social skills because they're not really interacting socially with very many people. It's a very painful period, and it's one that has its lasting emotional scars through life. It takes a lot to overcome it. If you don't learn those important social skills at that period, it's very hard to readjust and learn them later on. There's emotional isolation too. There are many young people who will discover that they can lie pretty well. They can hide the fact that they can disguise their real nature, their real feelings, and fit in. Many of them even become compulsive fitters in. Joiners, athletes, scholars, popular in school. Many of the people that come to the Hedrick Martin Institute, are not suspected of being gay in their environments. They're doing great on a superficial level, but the price that they're paying is that they feel phony. They become compulsive because no matter how much they achieve, they don't feel as if they own any of it, because they know that it would all dissolve instantly, that all the attention and all the friendship that they're enjoying, all the acceptance that they're enjoying at this point in life would disappear if people found out who they really were. And so they're learning to invalidate their feelings. Learning that their feelings don't count for much, or maybe even brand them as terrible people. That while they might be very beautiful on the outside, they feel very ugly inside. And it becomes a web of deception. That as you start lying about one thing and pretending to be what you're not, it becomes real easy to pretend to be almost anything. And many young people just get really confused about who they even are anymore. Because everything that they want to be, they can pretend to be. But it has no lasting or real impact on how they feel about themselves. That kind of emotional isolation is also very lasting, very devastating effects on how a person grows up, how they feel about themselves throughout life. It makes it very, very difficult for many lesbian and gay adults to get into and sustain primary relationships as adults, because emotionally they're so used to hiding and withdrawing. I have no statistic on this, and I know of no study, but my personal experience is that the majority of gay people, and when I talk about gay people, I'm talking about those who accept who they are, not the ones who spend their whole life hiding, but those who decide to come into their own and admit who they are. The majority of lesbian gay people are in long-lasting primary relationships, but I think that they get into them about a decade later than their heterosexual brothers and sisters. It takes that much catching up to heal the scars of hating yourself and feeling that you have to hide who you are. There's another form of isolation, that's cognitive isolation. Lesbian and gay people who grow up in a very straight society are cut off from the mechanism to find out the information about homosexuality. Up until very recently, even if you went to the library, as I know some enterprising people who did and looked up homosexuality, what you're going to find on the shelves would make you want to go back in the closet in a hurry. But you have to be pretty brave to go to the library. In fact, I remember a sort of cute story. In the early days of the Hedrick Martin Institute, there were some grants available to certain libraries, school libraries, made available, I don't remember back then, to put information, literature about homosexuality that was appropriate for adolescents on high school library shelves. And one of the complaints that we were getting very early on from librarians was that it was getting stolen. It kept disappearing. And we realized that means it's getting around, that most of the young people who could benefit from this are not going to check it out. I mean, they're not going to take the book and go past the librarian and check out the book about homosexuality. And they're not going to sit there in the library where anybody can look over the shoulder and read a book about homosexuality. So they were getting stolen. So we made sure that the funding was consistent and it kept up. And it's very important that these books kept coming into the library because they were going out of the library too. But gay people grow up in our society, which is very homophobic. And gay people develop the same opinions about gay people that their counterparts in society do. And so long before a person is aware of their sexual orientation, they've been taught to hate gay people. They've been taught all the stereotypes about gay people. And that's one of the things that makes it very hard to be aware and come out as a gay person and figure out that you're gay. Because at the same time that you might have a very strong attraction to a teacher of the same sex or a peer, you know all the things that people say about gay people and they're not true about you. You know that gay people are only interested in one-night stands and not interested in forming relationships. But you know deep in your heart that what you really want is to find one very special person and fall in love and settle down. So that means you're not gay, right? You know that if you're a gay male, you know that gay men want to be women, gay women want to be men, that's what society tells you. And you know that that's not true about you. So maybe this feeling you're having for your friend is confusing, but it could mean that you're gay because you're not like that. You also know that what society tells you, that gay people grow up to be old and lonely. and you certainly don't want that to happen to you. So you're going to fight with every fiber of your body not to be gay because you don't want to end up old and lonely. Interestingly, the studies that have been done about aging and lesbian and gay people is that, and again I'm talking about lesbian and gay people who accept who they are, who come out and live an openly gay life, then most of them fare a lot better as old people because the nature of the gay community forces people to rely more on their social networks and continue to sometimes recreate and reinvent new social networks in their life. And whereas we're all familiar with the empty nest syndrome, or what happens to people who are unprepared to be widowed or divorced in later life, but there are many people who never adapt successfully because their whole support network was their family, and if the family breaks down, there are many people who are never able to move out of their family network and find support systems elsewhere. And for many gay people who have been forced to rely on their social skills as adults and continuing through life, find that they continue to be successful throughout their life and continue to be able to adapt to new situations and make friends easily. But the myths about gay people make it very hard to want to be gay. They make it very hard to understand if you are gay, because the feelings that you have about yourself don't mesh with the concepts that society tells you about homosexuality. And we program all young people to be heterosexual. We see little kids playing house, and long before puberty, people think it's very cute when little kids play at dating games. And so people grow up expecting to be a traditional mommy or a traditional daddy, to be a traditional heterosexual even before they realize what sex is. They certainly know about relationships between the sexes. And by playing those games, they're programmed to grow up into that adult. And so when that programming runs into a collision course with their own sexual orientation and their own hormones and libido, it's very confusing and something has to get derailed. Now culture, the cultures that we grow up in, and culture is a very important catchword today. We're so much more aware of it, and how the different cultures we grow up in affect us. We talk about multiculturalism. And the truth is that most of us are multicultural people. We belong to a number of different groups. Our gender defines us as part of the culture. Our race, our religion, maybe the political party of our parents, or the country club, or the neighborhood, or the school, or the fraternity that we belong to. A lot of our lives are lived as being part of a group, part of the we versus them, knowing who we are by the company that we keep. And those groups are very important. They define our support networks. When we run into trouble, we know who to go to. We can go to our families, and we can go to our teacher at school, our priest or our rabbi, maybe to our peers. Our after-school program. All these support networks that we grow up and they're in place for us, they all break down when the problem that's facing an adolescent is homosexuality. Because a young person is not going to go to their family. Many of them are afraid, and rightfully so, that if they talk to their school guidance counselor, that the parents are going to get a call. I've seen it happen many times. I dealt with a number of cases at Hendrick Morton that became explosive and serious catastrophes because that was the first reaction of a school guidance counselor when hearing about an adolescent's sexual orientation, is that they have to call the family in on this. And so I understand why young people don't tell them guidance counselors. In fact, when I speak to teachers and to guidance counselors or to people who work primarily with adolescents, how many people here work primarily with adolescent population? I always tell people that the responsibility is on you. I remember a number of times when I spoke to groups this size and larger, primarily made up of school counselors, and I would ask people, how many of you have had young people come into your office and say, I'm gay? Almost no hands go up. And I tell you, isn't that surprising? I mean, you know that some of the people on your caseload must be lesbian and gay. For everything that I'm telling you, if you didn't know before, you know that that's a very difficult, confusing period, full of a lot of risks for a young person to go through. You're the person identified in school to go to if a young person has a problem. How come the gay people in school are not coming to you? And it comes down to a matter of trust. What are you doing to identify yourself as gay positive, as gay supportive? Because if you're not doing it, you can forget about young people assuming it. If you don't have posters up, if you don't have literature out, if you don't have the books on your shelf, if you don't mention it, I always tell teachers, it doesn't matter if you're teaching math or history. I've never known a teacher who didn't talk a lot about themselves and what they did the week before and the concert they're going to next Saturday. And if you can't find it in your power to bring up a gay topic, to talk about someone you know who's gay, a friend or a family member, even if you have to make it up, so that that young person sitting in your class who wonders what you would think of them if you knew that they were gay can hear that you would still like them. Because I guarantee you, if you do that, you're going to have young people coming up to you and telling you that they're gay and they want to talk about it. But if you're not doing that, you're not going to have them coming to you. And I think that the responsibility is yours, that they end up going to the streets and other places which are not appropriate for an adolescent to be able to walk. But as I said, all of these support systems break down. They're not there for gay adolescents. They have to go somewhere else. Now there's something, I think when you talk about culture, there are some real similarities between all groups, all minority groups especially. And there are some differences. There's one really glaring difference about gay people as a minority group. And that is that we don't grow up with our rights. We don't grow up with a culture that teaches us pride in ourselves. But if you're Jewish or black or Puerto Rican, long before you go out into the streets and into the larger world and find out that you're different and that there are people out there who don't like you, you grow up in a family that supports you, that teaches you to be proud of who you are. And when you go down there and out there in the real world and you get hurt and someone calls you a name, you know where you can come back and get hugs. But if you discover that you're gay, you don't know where to turn. And so what happens to a lot of young people, and I'm going to talk about the other risk. I talked about the isolation before. There's an even more serious risk for gay adolescents. Many of them, once they become aware that they don't fit in, that they're different, and they become determined to find a place where they're not different, and most of them will never find a lesbian gay community center or an agency like the Hedrick Institute. Most of them will hear that there's a place in their city like Times Square or the waterfront of Greenwich Village or a gay bar and run there because they want to meet people like themselves. They want to fit in. As I said before, those places are just not appropriate for an adolescent to be. That an adolescent who goes out to Times Square or to the piers of Greenwich Village, what they're seeking and what they find and accept are two very different things. People don't go make the first trip to the piers to become prostitutes. They don't make the first trip there to be sexually exploited. They go there to find a society where they can be accepted. What they find in those places is a society where they can be accepted for a price. And that price is usually sexual exploitation. And many of them will get caught up in prostitution, or being exploited by older people, pulled into drug addiction. That's what's out there. And we all know how important it is for adolescents to fit in, to be part of their peers. And so the same drive that drives them away from the security of their own neighborhood, the support groups of their school and family, which makes them seek out a place where they can fit in, once they find those places, they're going to do their best to fit in. And that's going to mean using drugs, using sex as a way to meet people, as a social vehicle. Up until very recently, the lesbian and gay community itself, the adult community, the political community, was very unsupportive of lesbian and gay adolescents. Part of it was from a very real fear of the fact that one of the mean epithets that's cast against the gay community all the time is that we prey on children, that we're, child abusers. And so many people in the gay community and many organizations in the gay community, in fear of feeding into that stereotype, have not allowed, have actually had rules against people under 18 joining. That's all very well and good, but where do the young people go? When the Hedrick Martin Institute started, we got no support from the lesbian and gay community. That we couldn't even get any of the gay newspapers in the community to write one single story about the work we were doing until it appeared on the front page of the New York Times. Then we were acceptable. But because of the fear of being called child abusers, many people, many organizations in the gay community still don't reach a hand out to young people. So what happens to these young people? Many of them, even if they don't immediately get into drugs, even if they're not out to their families, but they're going every day after school to hang out. One of the first things that they discover is that, unlike their local after-school program, these places don't come alive at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If you really want to see action and have fun and be there when they're jumping, you have to be there between 11 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning. And so after a couple of trips, they'll alter their pattern. And then suddenly, they're missing curfew at home. Or they're staying out all night. Many times, the parents are not even aware that the problem is that their child is gay. They're just aware that suddenly they're not coming home. They're missing curfew. They're staying out all night and missing school in the morning. Another point that I stress to people who work in school environments about truancy, because I've never seen it listed, but when people start, all the list of things that you look for, the signs you look for of what's going on for a young person when they're truant, nobody ever even mentions that it might be homosexuality, that they might not feel supported where they are. They might have become part of a late night community, and so they're not coming to school in the morning. And I've seen it happen many, many times when no intervention worked because it never hit the target. Nobody knew what they were looking at. So consider it. That could be the core of what's happening. Before I started working at the Hedrick Martin Institute, maybe I was naive, but I knew about runaway kids. Just I didn't know anything about throwaway kids. I never would have believed that there are families that throw out their kids. Now it's a reality that I live with all the time. The kids at Madrigal House, I throw them out. The kids at the Harvey Mill School, lots and lots of the kids at the Hedrick Martin Institute are on the street because their parents don't accept their being gay. And this is a problem partly fueled, as I said, by the far right, teaching parents that they should not love their gay kids. That there are many parents who believe that by kicking their kids out, their kids will learn a lesson and come home with their tails between their legs and realize that they can't live without mommy and daddy. And so when you go out on the street and see what the real world is like, and when you're ready to come home and obey my rules and be the way I want you to be, you can live under my roof. And with the intention and the belief that their kids will come home, not realizing that they've set up guidelines and parameters that are impossible to fulfill, and so these kids are permanently pushed out on the street. Another problem of those kids who wind up on the street. I've been talking about homosexuality, for a lot of years and working in the community. It wasn't always a time, as there is today, when you really can't talk about that topic and not talk about AIDS. But you really can't talk about, lesbian gay issues and not talk about AIDS. Certainly a very big risk for all gay adolescents. Unfortunately, practically an inevitability for kids who are on the street, who come out by going to the piers and 42nd Street. A lot of money, a lot of effort is being spent today trying to educate young people about AIDS. My personal belief is that a lot of it is being misspent. A lot of it is just too off target. Because the truth is that everything that you need to know about safe sex or abstinence can fit on the inside of a matchbook. And those lessons are clear ones, they're short ones, they're not very deep. The real issues that we have to teach young people about if we're going to get them to protect themselves, about self-esteem. Because most young people, once they realize that they're gay, figure, who wants to live anyway? Who wants to live like this? Let me just have fun now, and what happens later I'm not worried about. It's a real problem in teaching people about same-sex and AIDS, because as we all know, one of the things about adolescents is they don't have quite a well-developed sense of cause and effect. There's not a great sense of the inevitability that later will become sooner before you know it. It's why, it's the same reason why, many kids don't study. They know that their test is coming, they know that their report card is going to come a few months away. And come June, there's not a whole lot you can do about the fact that you haven't studied all year. I don't have easy answers. I don't know how you suddenly make a young person grow up overnight when that should be a long process of maturity. But if we're going to do anything to protect young people from AIDS, we have to start making inroads into that, teaching people maturity, responsibility, self-esteem, the desire to survive the AIDS crisis. Lastly, I want to talk about families. The larger picture. How young people fit in. Most gay people never tell their families that they're gay. At the Hedrick Martin Institute, 80% of the young people coming there came without the knowledge of their parents. The parents did not know that they were gay. A surprising number, a majority, I think, of adults living pretty openly gay lives with lovers, strong, supportive gay social networks, are not out to their families when they go home for family events, major holidays. Have to be guarded about what they say. When the parents come over, all the books and the magazines get, tucked under the pillows of the sofa. So to a large extent, it never becomes an issue that gets worked on in therapy. Although my experience is that it should be. That there are many families puzzled over the fact that their children are growing more and more distant. Wonder why their children move to other cities. Wonder why they don't seem busy at the time of holidays and family events and don't come in. And it's one of the sad, tragic, self-fulfilling prophecies in the lives of a lot of lesbian gay people, that the fear of rejection from their family makes them push their own families away. To avoid the pain of the real rejection, they end up rejecting themselves, ejecting themselves, becoming distant. And the problem is, nobody ever knows whether or not the families would have rejected them or not, or whether or not that rejection could not have been overcome and healed and brought back together, because people are afraid of going through the pain. I believe that in most families, that healing can take place. And I think that's one of the ways in which, most of you can help a lot, because I think that a lot of assistance is needed. Because the family really breaks down. All of the traditional methods of communicating and showing love don't work when kids come out to parents. And this is true whether it's young kids coming out to parents or 30-year-old kids coming out to parents. I'm going to talk mostly about young kids because the powers are even more important. People frequently ask us, who asked us when I was at the Hedrick Martin Institute, asked me, do you think that someone should come out to the parents? You know, people would think, do you encourage young people to come out to the parents? I don't think anybody should encourage anybody to come out to the parents. I don't think there's a lot you can do to discourage it. What we used to do, what I still do, if someone is thinking about coming out to the parents, I say, let's go over a checklist. Let's see what the expectations are. And then make a good decision before you do it. One, for most young people, the parents exert a great deal of power over their life. A roof over their head, continuing to pay their tuition, the money in their pocket, access to any kind of mobility outside of the home. And I tell people, if you believe that there's any possibility that your parent might kick you out of the house or not pay for your college or lock you up and not let you out of the house, are you prepared to deal with that? If the answer is no, then maybe you should reconsider whether or not this is the time to come out to your parents. And I want to add here that there's a very distinct difference between the way parents deal with boys who come out and girls who come out, at least, among adolescents. Boys run a much, much higher risk of being thrown out of the house. The more typical response to a daughter coming out as a lesbian is to make her a prisoner. No phone calls, mail gets opened, she gets driven to school and picked up at school and brought home, no friends allowed to visit. I guess that says a lot about how society feels about boys and girls. But I want to talk about those kids who do come out to their parents. First of all, the one thing that I always tell young people is to be prepared. I think the most astounding thing that kids are unexpected or unready for is the role reversal that takes place. Suddenly, the child is the parent and the parent is the child. The children have much more information. They also have the power at this point. It's the parents who have to coax and control them. The kids are coming to them with some experience. The parents are confused and unknowledgeable about the subject. So I always tell young people, be prepared to act like a parent. Be prepared to be patient. Be prepared to listen. Be prepared for the onslaught of all the anger that you're going to receive. Don't react to it the way you always do when your parents yell at you, because you're going to wind up in a spiraling, form of anger that could lead to violence and be very, very hard to undo. Don't expect your parents to suddenly feel fine about your sexual orientation when maybe it took you several months to feel okay about it. Have trust that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and patience that if there was love in this family to begin with, that you can get back to that point. But don't expect it right away. Don't make an ultimatum to your parents that I'm gay, love me as I am right now, or I'm out the door. Because it's probably not going to work that way. You're only pushing yourself away. It's also important to understand the stages that parents go through. We're also in acceptance, because it's not an overnight process. We're all familiar with the stages that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross recognized in working with dying patients. And the similarities are astoundingly similar when working with people coming out and parents learning about their gay children. Because suddenly there's the death of an individual, the individual you thought was there. Parents look at their children who they newly discovered are gay in bewilderment and say, who is this person? Bring back my child. It takes a long time to believe that this is the same person that's always been here. The things that are changed really don't affect me, the very personal issues, but that the person that I loved is still standing in front of me, and it's not my right to ask what they do in bed, because I don't ask it of my heterosexual children. But the first stage, of course, is shock, which can lead to anger, which can lead to violence. Just like people who discover that suddenly then they only have 6 months to live. Sometimes in their shock and anger, they kill themselves. But anger gives over to denial. There's a denial stage where this can't be happening. You have many parents, I would say the majority of parents in the denial stage will say, my child is not gay, I did not raise my child to be gay. This is a result of those friends he's been hanging around with who have gotten this stupid idea into his head. And if I can get him away from those friends, he'll come to his senses. That leads to the anger stage, when nothing seems to be working. There's another problem, the guilt. Why me? Why is this happening to me? Society teaches parents that homosexuality is the result of poor upbringing. So one of the things that makes it very difficult for parents to accept their gay children is that this is a sign of their own failure. The sense of guilt is also an important element when you're dealing with gay parents parents accepting their gay children, is that a lot of what you have to deal with is their own sense of guilt, that what did they do wrong? And as long as they continue to believe that this is something that they did wrong, they're never going to be able to accept their children as just being who they are. The next stage is depression. Resignation of, I can't do anything about this. Many times that will lead to a complete breach of relationship and communication between parents and children. And it's in that stage, most importantly, that the communication has to be maintained, that parents are able to hear. And children also have to, as I said before, in their communication, realize that it's a process. They can't expect and demand wholehearted acceptance of who they are immediately, unconditionally, because it's not going to happen, and it will prevent the eventual feeling of acceptance that will be there. Eventually, there's acceptance, as in the dying patient who comes to grips, who's working on the issue, and is able to put closure on their life. The parent who finally accepts their child for who they are, realizing that this is still the same person in almost every possible way that I've raised, and then there's nothing ahead but a very rosy, glorious future. That, when the person comes out at a very young age, this can be, something that is barely a memory in the lives of most families who have good relationships with their gay children. There's one other issue I want to raise before go on to question and answer, which I'm going to talk about. And that's the family dynamic issue that comes out. One thing you have to be very, very careful if you're working with families with gay children are the triangles that form. Most gay people don't come out to both parents or the whole family at the same time. Usually, with a lot of pre-thought that people decide which of my parents is going to be my best advocates, where am I going to get the most support. Most young people decide that's with their mother, which is not always the case. We assume that women in our society are going to be more sympathetic, more understanding. And so many young people choose the mother to come out to before the father. And this is a stereotype that even in the literature and in some movies, about coming out that have been made, the father is usually the villain. But my experience working with young people is that it just doesn't always work that way. Sometimes maybe it's because the excessive guilt that mothers feel, whatever, that sometimes, or maybe because of the way society teaches men to think about sex, that it's easier. But for whatever reason, it's just, I don't find a consistent plan about which parent is going to have the easiest time dealing with their child coming out. But once one parent is chosen, what you almost always get is this triangular with, don't tell your father, don't. This will be our secret, which of course, in family secrets, becomes a way of controlling people. Once this becomes our secret, then I become the person who's going to help you to overcome this. And young people, I guess all people, all children of parents are susceptible to falling into that trap. In most cases, I would say though, it's not good. So long as you're only dealing with part of the family, it's going to be very, very hard to resolve the issue. So long as you're still promoting secrecy, you're probably never going to get to the stage of full acceptance. I can't say that that's always the case. There might be times where the fear of actual, violence might be so real that you would have to exclude one parent. But I think it's more important to make sure that you're not falling into the trap of promoting the triangles that form the families, which you can get really stuck in and go around in circles. You never resolve. I really would like to open up the time to, to seeing what other issues people have in their heads. So, I'll take questions about anything, whether it's, the issues we're talking about, or my work, or personal issues. I'll answer any questions except geography.
Can you make a connection between alcohol and drug abuse and gay and lesbian around?
Yes. One of the long-term problems in the lesbian and gay community, and this is changing, is that up until recently, all social interaction between lesbian and gay people took place in bars. That, if you wanted to go out, if a gay person wanted to go out and meet other gay people, there was no place to go but the bars. And if you start going to the bars, when you're young, and that becomes your hangout, you're going to be drinking. Also, if you're depressed, you don't like yourself very much, you're going to be drinking a lot. Up until crack came on the scene, and that was a few years after the Hedrick Martin Institute developed. One of the interesting statistics we found among our young people is we saw much less hard drug abuse among our population than any of the other adolescent, programs in New York that were catering to the general population. And we saw very little hard drug use. We saw a lot of alcohol abuse. in the early days of crack, that changed a lot because the places that gay people went became very targeted. But I think that that's even settled a bit now. But alcoholism has been a real problem in the adult lesbian gay community because people start drinking at a very young age. And also because of the breakdown of the support systems that I spoke about before, that many lesbian gay people, when they become aware of having a drinking problem, are uncomfortable going for help to traditional support places. In the past few years, there's been some really terrific organizations that have developed specifically working with, lesbian and gay, alcoholics.
I've had this situation where I've had 4 or 5 lesbian women who identified themselves either in adolescence or college years as lesbian and have then had significant relationships with others of a long-term nature. And then have also had heterosexual feelings, been interested in men, and then think, well, maybe I really should give up the lesbian life and have a heterosexual relationship. I can't really tell whether it's that they've had difficulty accepting within themselves that they're lesbian, or because they were sexually abused, that they've become afraid to have a relationship with a man, would think that they might be interested. Do you have any comments to make?
Yeah, first on the latter part, I know of no survey or no study that's been able to correlate early sexual abuse with one's sexual orientation. I think we're all still in shock in the last several years with the revelation of the prevalence, the high degree of sexual abuse that goes on toward our young people, male and female, really is an issue that's been kept in the closet for a long, long time. And now that it's out, I think we're all still reeling from the fact that it's something that we thought was so rare is really so common. I think that early sexual abuse has a great deal to do with how a person feels about their sexual orientation, whether it's gay or straight. Has a great deal to do with how easy it is to accept oneself, how easy it is to form any kind of relationship, but I don't think it's what makes a person gay or straight. I think that a young boy who's a victim of sexual abuse by a man probably will have a very difficult time accepting his homosexuality later on. Rather than that it pushes him to it, it's something that makes it very hard to accept it because he associates it with violence. And probably, unless there's intervention, may end up expressing his gay sexual orientation by continuing the scenario of violence and by exploiting other people. But I truly don't believe that it makes a person gay or straight. I think it has a lot to do with how you feel about sex in general. As far as what to do with someone who has expressed themselves as and identified as being lesbian or gay, at a young age, and then suddenly says, I think I'm going to see what's on the other side of the fence. I think that's very healthy. I think that it should be encouraged with the safety proviso that you let people know that it's important, first of all, to think about safe sex if they're going to be engaging in sexual relationships. Also about exploiting people. It happens more in the other sense that very frequently. I know, for instance, that I work with a lot of boys, for instance, who will suddenly decide, I want to see what it's like. I want to see if I can have sex with a woman, and try it, see if I like it. I always let people know that other people aren't lab animals. They're not guinea pigs, and make sure that as you're examining what's good for you, that you don't step on someone else's toes and hurt other people. But I think that if you if you confine your exploration within those boundaries, I think that adolescence is a time when exploration is very healthy. Yes.
You've made a point that a person, an individual, has no choice as to their sexual orientations, that are finding it, becoming comfortable with it, and maturing and so on. I wonder if you accept the possibility of bisexuality, the possibility that an individual could form an intimate, emotional, and sexual relationship with both male and females.
There was a time when I did not. But working, with, in the field for so long, I'm convinced that there are people who are capable of having really meaningful, satisfying relationships with either, a male or a female partner. I'm not sure what that means exactly. I mean, maybe it means exactly what Kinsey, said, that although I don't think that most people fall somewhere between the extremes. I think that most people are either gay or straight, but I think it says a lot about how complicated our sexual orientation is to begin with, and how many social factors come into it. The expectations of what we want our spouse to be, and what we want out of life, and who we want to relate to. That sex isn't all in the gland. It isn't all in genital-to-genital contact. A lot of our sexuality and intimate relationships and social relationships are much more complicated. Have a lot to do with what kind of partner do I want in life that will help me pursue my career. Who's going to, make me more accepted in my community. For many people, those questions only cloud the issue and make them delay being who they are. But for many people, they just become additional factors.
Perhaps you can answer from your own experience or from your work with Orthodox gay people. How do you encourage adolescents or even adults to reconcile their spirituality and their wishing to belong to a community where the religious leaders may tell them that what they're doing is a sin, reinforce some of the negative stereotypes and the negative opinion, and help them, to reconcile either who they are within that community and be able to be in that religious community and be gay, or separate from that community to find another church perhaps. How do you help people with that?
Okay. That's a very important issue for me. It makes me very sad that I know many very spiritual people for whom their religion is very important to them. After years of trying to not be gay, came to the conclusion, well, if that didn't work, then they have to give up their religion. It became an either-or situation. I don't believe that that's true. I think what you need to do is maybe find a different priest or a different rabbi. But certainly within the parameters and the confines and the identity of who you are as a spiritual being, there are places, there are organizations, there are communities. It comes back down to isolation. If you're trying to do it on your own and you feel different and you feel as if everything that your religion is telling you doesn't gel with who you are and you have to run away from it, that's very sad. One of the reasons that I run the support group is that I enable a number of people who have been torn for years between which is the real me, and discover that, well, if there are all these other people who feel the same way, then it's okay for me to feel as if I'm part of two worlds.
I just wanted to recommend a movie I've seen, The Wedding Banquet. You think you're familiar with that?
Yeah.
And it just shows the family dynamics that you were talking about so clearly. And I also wanted to ask you how you work with a lot of families also at the Hendrick Institute? Or
Also, we do, one of the things very interesting about working with families, and one reason why the Hendrick Martin Institute goes out and does a lot of trainings and keeps contact with a lot of family therapists, is that there are a lot of families who will be willing to see someone, but they're not going to see a gay person. A very important organization, in fact, if people aren't familiar with, is a group called Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. it has branches in almost every city and small town. It's very easy, to find them in the yellow pages, and it's almost like a ministry which is everywhere. And in the 20 years since they formed, they really are everywhere, and even small communities. And it's a very, very useful group to deal with, because there are many parents who are not going to talk to a gay person, but they would be willing to talk to another parent who's going through the same thing. They'd be willing to talk to a therapist, but not a lesbian or gay therapist. So while we see a lot of families, we mostly have to help young people find outside therapists to see. A lot of families just think that we would be too biased.
Two questions. The first one's real short. Could you give a specific name of an organization for gay alcoholics? You mentioned something before.
The Pride Institute.
Where is that?
It's I would say if you call, there's a gay switchboard in New York City that you can get, and they would be able to give you the Pride Institute, and they would be able to help you with that. There's also most lesbian gay community centers today have AA meetings that meet on their premises that are specifically for lesbian and gay population.
How do I get a hold of the gay switchboard?
Excuse me, I just want to, Steve, isn't that the organization that Emily McNally works with? Oh, yeah, I think so. There's a psychologist in New Jersey, licensed psychologist. If you call the licensing board in New Jersey and just ask for the name and address of Emily McNally, I'm quite sure she's the one who works with the Bride Institute. Okay, and if you have any trouble, let me know, because I can find out for you.
And the gay, if you need the gay switchboard in New York, you can get by just asking, New York, Manhattan Directory Assistance for the gay switchboard, and they have it. Okay, and they can help you with that. You have one more question?
Yeah, I had another question. I see a lot of parents who come in and they're like panicking because their kids of whatever age are different. And when I press it a little bit, it's, and ask them, are you afraid that they're gay? Yeah. You have any comments on that? Or
Yeah,
where
I
kind
do.
of, because that's sort of like before the fact that they notice it and they're all upset.
I've had experiences, not a whole lot, but there have been times when parents would contact the, Hedrick Martin Institute and want to bring in their kids who are only like 9 or 10 years old. And the parent's concern is, he acts very gay to me. I think he's gay. And I feel really sorry for those young people, because I think you should leave it alone. I think if that young person does end up, later on feeling that they're gay, the humiliation and the persecution and the singling out that they've gone through is going to make it even harder for them to accept it. They're going to fight it because they're denying, because they're not aware of it. And I think if, and I think there are gender issues that come up that parents who aren't satisfied with, the toys that their children play with, or the friends that they keep, or the way that they walk or talk, or mannerisms. And I think the issue to work on is the parents' comfort level. But I think it's really stigmatizing to the young person to start making them deal with and confront them. Well, are you gay or are you not gay? If you're gay, I'll accept it, but tell me already, because I have to know. One of the things, in fact, that I always tell young people when they're coming out and we're going through the period of, I'm not sure if I'm gay, is, do you have to know right now? You're not getting married tomorrow. You're not going. Adolescence is a very confusing time to be in. I think giving permission for kids to be confused is one of the best things that we can give them. Because to couple the confusion with the anxiety of feeling that it's wrong to be confused makes it very hard to resolve that. I think telling kids that it's okay not to know if you're gay or not is a real gift we can give them.
I want to ask, have you ever tried to use contract aggression to help them resolve fear, guilt, etc.?
Past life regression? I never have. I don't know if anybody's working. It's fascinating. It never even occurred to me. But
I mention this because I treated several of them this way, and it seems like
and what were your results?
very quickly, they feel very good and they can meet the challenge in life here and now much more.
I'm curious, were they gay in former life? Were they gay before?
Well, this is actually based on a theory by Edgar Casey of ARE, Association of Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. It's a large group of people. A lot of them these
I don't know anything about it. But
yeah,
it
anyway,
sounds
according to him, the reason, I know you mentioned earlier that there is a physiological reason, for instance, like hormonal secretion and so on.
well, I didn't mean a hormonal secretion that makes a person gay. I don't know what makes a person gay. I don't think anybody does. When I talk about the hormones going, I just mean the ones that make you sexual and suddenly aware of needing to, adolescence is a time when hormones are confusing and they're raging and you have to do something. I don't know anything conclusive about, about the hormones of what chemistry or whether it's in the DNA or whatever. There have been so many theories. In fact, we're living in a time right now where so much is changing and coming up, yearly. That's changing the way people think about, what the nature of homosexuality is. I just hope that when they discover it, it's seen as not a disease mechanism, but just,
prenatally then, surgery.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, I always remind people that up until the 1920s, the New York City public school system used to punish left-handedness to teach anatomy. Left-handedness, is we know now is left-handedness. We know now is just genetically determined and unalterable. Many people were stigmatized and hurt, and all kinds of learning disabilities were created by stigmatizing people and punishing them for left-handedness. I feel very much the same way about sexual orientation. It just is, and if people would leave it alone, it would be better for everybody.
I'd like to finish sharing. May I go on a little bit?
I don't think so.
I think there are a lot of other questions, but I'll be happy to say and talk to you afterwards. Okay. Yeah.
What about the issue of the pressure of society to being heterosexual, to marry, have families, and people who have never really identified themselves as being gay go on to marry, have children, and then confront, or come out, or don't come out, and present in therapist offices when the issue becomes their sexual.
I'm going to back up a little bit. In answer to that, I want to bring up something else first that leads into this. I'm always curious that a lot of